Hey everybody! So we are looking at the most powerful spells in D&D, spells that might be more powerful than Wish. And I've gone over two other spells so far. I've gone over Prismatic Wall, and I've gone over True Polymorph, and I am going to go over the third spell that I think might be more powerful than Wish. This is the last one that I think might be more powerful than Wish. And I should mention that if you haven't seen either of the other two videos, I'm going to link them in the video description. And especially the True Polymorph one, if you haven't seen it, maybe consider watching it first, because I am going to be comparing True Polymorph with Shapechange, which is the spell I'm going over today. Though I will mention that Shapechange and True Polymorph are not as easy to compare as you might think, and I'm going to show some examples here of creatures that you might Shapechange into, and you will see just the vast difference in the kind of utility you get out of these two spells. So Shapechange is up on your screen right now. Now, if you look at True Polymorph and Shapechange, you'll see similarities in these two spells right away. Except, if you read it quickly, you might mistakenly think that Shapechange is kind of like True Polymorph, except only cast on yourself to turn into another creature, and after an hour, unlike True Polymorph, the spell ends, and so you can only be transformed while your concentration continues. Well, with True Polymorph, you have no time limit. So True Polymorph does that and has other things you can do with it, so it would seem more powerful on the surface. But if we look closely at Shapechange and then we go into what you can do with it, you will see that there are tons of things that you can do with Shapechange that you cannot do with True Polymorph, which is why I think Shapechange may be more powerful than True Polymorph. That said, let's look at the reasons why True Polymorph might be the better option. So if you did watch my True Polymorph video, you'll know I discussed playing a Beholder. So this is an actual session I played where I True Polymorph myself into a Beholder, and in that session, I cast the spell on myself, concentrated for the hour, and then I was a Beholder for the rest of the session, and I didn't need to concentrate on it. And that is not something you can do with Shapechange. Also, unlike True Polymorph, Shapechange doesn't allow you to turn into a construct or undead creature. True Polymorph doesn't have that restriction. Oh, and Shapechange has a costly component. There's a 1,500 gold piece material component. Now, it's not consumed, but True Polymorph doesn't have a costly component. So that's a pretty hefty list of things that True Polymorph gives you that Shapechange does not. Though there are a number of things that are the same. You get temporary hit points the same. You keep your own hit points and hit dice the same. And just like True Polymorph, you don't necessarily lose the form if you lose the temporary hit points. You only lose the form when the spell ends, either after the hour duration or if you lose or end your concentration earlier. Now, if you had thought, after reading Shapechange after getting your player's handbook, that Shapechange did end after you lost your temporary hit points, you can be forgiven, because the first copies of the player's handbook wrote it that way. It has changed since. So the paragraph that I've highlighted here used to say that the spell ended when you lost the temporary hit points. It no longer says that. So if you just look at the two spells quickly, I think Shapechange looks worse than True Polymorph. But if you analyze it more carefully, the more you realize that there's a lot of ways that Shapechange is more powerful than True Polymorph, and some of them very, very substantial. So I'm going to give you the quick list of ways Shapechange is more powerful than True Polymorph, but we are going to go more deeply into the weeds, because at the end of this video, I'm going to go over examples of forms you might take with Shapechange and the various benefits that each of those forms might give you. So one of the most dramatic ways that Shapechange is better than True Polymorph is the sentence that I have highlighted. And it's the very first sentence of the spell. You Shapechange into another creature for the duration, or until you take the magic action to shapeshift into a different eligible form. So you can use a magic action anytime during the duration of Shapechange and change into a different form. Now, the wording here leaves some room for interpretation. Now, there's basically three main interpretations that I see reading this. The word I'm really concentrating on here is different, as in shapeshift into a different eligible form, because the way I read that, it could mean three different things. It could mean different than the original form you took. So let's say you cast Shapechange and you turn into a goblin. And then you use a magic action and you Shapechange into an orc. Well, by that reading, you wouldn't be able to turn into a goblin again, but you could turn into an orc again. That doesn't make any sense to me, so I don't think that is the intention, but that is one way you could read that sentence. The second way you could read different eligible form is that it means different than your current form. So if you Shapechange into a goblin, and then you use the magic action and Shapechange into an orc, then if you use another magic action, you could Shapechange into a goblin again, just not an orc again. And that makes a lot more sense intuitively, but it does leave the gate open for all kinds of extra abuse. And this spell already has all kinds of potential for abuse. But all kinds of extra abuse is possible if that is your interpretation. So although it makes sense intuitively, and although mechanically it works, I would advise against that reading. I'd actually advise for the third possible reading, because the third possible reading is, by different eligible form, they mean different than any form you've taken so far. So if you Shapechange and turn into a goblin, and then you magic action and Shapechange into an orc, and then you take another magic action, you can take any other form except for goblin or orc, or any other form that you had taken so far. And that is another possible reading. That is the way I would run it as a DM, and that is the way I would advise other DMs run it as well. But all three readings do make grammatical sense, so this is just one of those areas where the rules are a little vague, and you're going to have to make a ruling. The second way Shapechange has an advantage over True Polymorph is it says here you get to keep your intelligence, wisdom, and charisma scores. You don't with True Polymorph. You keep your proficiencies, and you keep your ability to communicate, and your spellcasting feature if you have one. And, I mean, you probably have one if you cast Shapechange in the first place, unless you had some kind of magic item that let you cast Shapechange when you're not a spellcaster, I guess. But my assumption would be that most of the time you see Shapechange, it's going to be a high-level druid or a high-level wizard that can cast this spell. Now, depending what form you select and what your original scores are, it might not be an advantage to keep your intelligence, wisdom, and charisma, but keeping your proficiencies, your ability to communicate, and I mean especially your ability to cast spells, is objectively just an improvement. And talking about spellcasting, let's talk about the third really huge advantage of Shapechange. It doesn't prevent you from using the spellcasting trait of the creature you select. So if the creature has spells, you can cast them. Now there is an unwritten restriction there since you're concentrating on Shapechange. And so that means that you would be unable to cast any spell that the creature could normally cast that would require concentration because you're already concentrating. It also prevents you from casting any spell that has a casting time of greater than an action, because casting a spell with a 1 minute or higher casting time also requires your concentration. So you'd be unable to cast those spells, but that leaves just a ton of spells that you can still cast. And later in this video, I am going to provide you a couple examples, but there are so many. You could keep a log of all the spells in the monster manual that any creature can cast, and then look up the spell that you need at any given time, and then just take a magic action, Shapechange into that creature, and cast that spell, and then Shapechange into something else, giving you access to a massive quantity of spells, and many spells that you could cast many times. Like if you have anybody in your party who is wounded, or needs a greater restoration, or you need to plane shift somewhere and you don't want to use a material component or the spell slot or cast a spell, there are so many options. And we're not even done. There is yet another advantage over True Polymorph, and that is that your equipment with True Polymorph melds into your new form and you can't use it. But here, you determine if the equipment drops to the ground, or, and this is the big one, it actually changes in both size and shape so that it fits your new form while you're in it. So you get to keep the benefits for all your equipment, including your magic items. So those are the differences from True Polymorph. And when you add them up, you end up with an extremely different spell. Now, I talked about a little bit in my True Polymorph video how it's a little bit more difficult spell to use. Like, when I used it, I did a lot of homework that I talked about in the video, going through stat block after stat block to determine the form that I wanted to take. So it is not a spell that you want to cast without thinking about that beforehand and taking that time. But Shapechange is a whole other ballgame. With Shapechange, you're going to need to do more homework than with True Polymorph, for sure. But on top of that, you need to keep track of endless possibilities that are not on your character sheet or on the selected stat block after you cast it. So many, I don't think it's even possible to get the full potential out of this spell in gameplay if you are a human being, unless you're allowed to take several hours for each turn you take after casting it. So I'm going to spend the rest of the video covering options and examples from the 2024 Monster Manual. Now, your DM might allow other source books besides the 2024 Monster Manual, but just with the Monster Manual, coming up with a list of examples, I had way more examples than would possibly fit in a video, and there is no way I caught everything. So I started to edit out and edit out and edit out till I have a list that will keep this video watchable. Not only that, there's no point me going over 100 monsters. You'll never remember 100 monsters, nor would I if I was actually playing. So I'm going to try to give you a list that someone might possibly keep track of in-game, but that's the thing. Shapechange does almost an unlimited number of things. How can you possibly keep track of all those things in your head and call them up at a moment's notice? You can't. So all you can do is do your homework, find some forms that do neat stuff that you might want to do, and then try to keep track of those forms as best you can during play. And I think that is the most you're going to get out of Shapechange in a real game. If you could remember everything and recall it at a moment's notice as it came up, I would have no problem at all saying Shapechange is the most powerful spell in D&D. No problem at all. But practically, that's not going to happen. So let's try to look at what we can do with it in a practical sense, what we might actually remember at our table. Though I do think it's almost certainly more powerful than Wish, and I'm going to demonstrate that to you right now. So here is the genie, and I'm just going to highlight the important part here, wishes. The genie has a 30% chance of knowing the wish spell. If the genie knows it, the genie can cast it only on behalf of a non-genie creature who can communicate a wish in a way the genie can understand. If the genie casts a spell for the creature, the genie suffers none of the spell's stress. Once the genie has cast it 3 times, the genie can't do so again for 365 days. So, if we take the form of a genie, technically speaking, we should be rolling for a 30% chance to know the wish spell. If we do know the wish spell, we can cast it 3 times. Now we have to cast it on behalf of a non-genie creature, but that's where the rest of your party comes in. You have tons of non-genie creatures who can do the wish for you or tell you what it should be, and then you can cast a spell without stress. Now, if you are unfamiliar with the wish spell, it does basically 3 things. The first is it can duplicate any spell of 8th level or lower, and there's some specifics on that I'll go over in my next video in the series. But if you do that, then the wish is gone, and that's what you get. You get a spell of 1st through 8th level. There's also a list of other things that can be done, or there is also the possibility of wishing for something that's not on the list. And then your DM decides whether you can do it or not with the wish spell. But if you do anything with wish other than duplicate another spell of 8th level or lower, you get stress. And the stress is bad. It has all kinds of pretty significant consequences if you use a wish for anything other than duplicating another spell. This is saying that if we use Shapechange as a way to cast wish, we don't have that issue. We can cast wish 3 times, and we don't have that issue. That's crazy, right? Now, obviously, thematically, I get why it's here. Under the Djinn, Makes perfect sense that it would have 3 wishes in this way, but as a stat block that as a player they've allowed us to access, that's insane. That's just off the rails. Now, you might be thinking, but Chris, only 30% chance. So if you cast Shapechange, there's still a 70% chance you're not going to be able to do this. And that's where you're wrong. Because the Djinn has this ability, and all of the genies have this ability. So I turn into a Djinn. I don't get this feature because I rolled the 70% chance. That's fine. I will Shapechange into an Afridi now. Now I get to roll again. And that didn't work out? Oh, well, that's fine. I'll Shapechange into a Merid then. Well, I get to roll again. Oh, that didn't work out? Okay. I'll Shapechange again into a Dao. And I get to roll again. That's off the rails, right? Because every single one of these wishes is significantly more powerful than the wish spell. Yet, we're in really good shape to be able to cast wish 3 times anyways, without the stress, from one casting of Shapechange. And we just started, right? Like, we've just used the first few rounds of this spell. We can do this outside of combat. The things you can do with wish, just the listed stuff that would normally cause stress, is ridiculously powerful. So we can do that 3 times, no stress, and then Shapechange into something else to continue our adventure. And we just started with Shapechange. This is so powerful that I probably wouldn't allow it as a DM. I'd certainly, as a player, never try to exploit it because I don't think it would be good for the game because it's so broken. Shapechange just makes it so easy to break this game. And in a way that Wish does not. So I definitely think Shapechange is significantly more powerful than Wish. Just because it can cast Wish multiple times much, much better than the Wish spell can. So that's just starting the spell. Oh, and remember when I said it would be easier to break the game if we interpret different creature as just different than your current form? Well, that's because then you could turn into a Djinn, to an Afridi, to a Merid, to a Dao, then back into a Djinn, and rinse and repeat for an hour, casting wish after wish after wish after wish. That's one example of how that would break the spell even further than it's already potentially broken. So is Shapechange more powerful than Wish? Come on. It trivializes the Wish spell. We haven't even started. Oh, Wish. I can cast that whenever I want with Shapechange, and much better than you would with the Wish spell, but I've got better things to do. Now, another form I just want to call out specifically before I get into my more generic examples is the Dragon Turtle, because one of the interesting things about Shapechange is you only get temporary hit points from your first form. So if I cast Shapechange and I turn into a Dragon Turtle, then I get 356 temporary hit points. And that's pretty much the most you're going to get out of this spell. There's a lot of forms that can give you over 300. So don't worry about this too much if you cast Shapechange during combat. You can probably get over 300 temporary hit points really easy. But if you want the most temporary hit points, you can do Dragon Turtle. It's challenge rating 17, so if you can cast Shapechange, you can probably turn into a Dragon Turtle. And then you get those temporary hit points and then go into something else. So if I then use a magic action to turn into a Goblin, I'm not recommending Goblin, by the way, I'm just using it as a random dramatic example, you would still have 356 temporary hit points. So what I'm going to do as I go into the list of examples is I'm going to start at the lower challenge ratings and work my way up, because just remember, anything over challenge rating 17, if you cast Shapechange, your level will matter, because if you are 17th level, you can't do anything over challenge rating 17. And there's no point me showing you anything over challenge rating 20, because you can't become the form of a creature over challenge rating 20. Actually, you can, and that's going to be one of the examples that I give you, but it's a little bit of a weird one. Normally you can't, but with Shapechange you can pretty much do anything. And let's go over some examples. So this is just a little quick example of why you might want to take a lower challenge rating form. So somebody is going to make an ability check in your party. Turn into a Sphinx of Wonder, use your burst of ingenuity, and they get +2 to their roll. And it doesn't really cost you anything because you just use your magic action to turn into something else. And speaking of low challenge rating creatures, if you go through the low challenge rating creatures that can cast spells, there's a lot of spells that you might cycle through if you're outside of combat. Like, for example, with the Druid, it has a Longstrider spell. So you would find different creatures that can cast Longstrider, and then you can cast Longstrider on your party, has good duration, doesn't use your concentration. We're up to challenge rating 2, and let's break the game further because we can turn into an Intellect Devourer, and that gives us Steel Body. So remember before I said you can't become more than a challenge rating 20 creature? Well, you kind of can, and that's you can turn into an Intellect Devourer, which is challenge rating 2, and then you can use Steel Body on a creature that has a challenge rating higher than 20, and you keep your Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma score, and you can access otherwise the stat block of the 30 challenge rating creature that you took over. Though it has to be a humanoid or beast, and that definitely means that we're not looking at stuff in the monster manual anymore. This would be stuff from third-party sources or adventures or maybe homebrew that your DM came up with. But if there is a super powerful humanoid and you can't take that form because it's too high a level, you can turn into an Intellect Devourer, and if you take down that form, what you want to do is when you bring it to 0 hit points, you incapacitate it instead of killing it. And then you can use Steel Body and take over that creature, which is just something that isn't going to come up in gameplay very often, but it is something that you can do. Does your party not have Rory's Telepathic Bond? No problem. Turn into a Myconid Sovereign, and then use your Rapport Spores, and now everyone has telepathy. Also, if you have some dead creatures nearby, might as well use your Animating Spores and turn them into Myconid Spore Servants. Just weird features, like weird insight from the Nothic that allows it to magically learn one fact or secret about a target. Did you forget to prepare the Etherealness spell? Well, you can turn into a Nightmare, and then you have Ethereal Stride, and you and up to 3 willing creatures within 5 feet of you, they don't have to be riding the creature, teleport to the ethereal plane from the material plane, or vice versa. I want to include just some weird stuff that you can do with Shapechange that's maybe not intuitive, but is just kind of weird and cool. So this is the Black Pudding. So let's say that you shape change and turn into a Black Pudding. Then you have somebody in your party do a tiny bit of slashing or lightning damage to you. Then you split. It says, well, the pudding is large or medium and has 10 or more hit points. So your hit points don't change when you cast Shape Change. So assuming you as a caster have over 10 hit points, that shouldn't be a problem. If you're subjected to lightning or slashing damage, so you can just have another party member do a little bit of lightning or slashing damage to you, the pudding splits into 2 new Black Puddings. And those Black Puddings are both you. Each new pudding is one size smaller than the original pudding and acts on its initiative. The original pudding's hit points are divided evenly between the new puddings, so your hit points get split up between the new Black Puddings, but you've just doubled your action economy. And remember, you can still cast spells while you're in this form. Or these forms, I should say, because you're now on the initiative order twice. In fact, you could split again. In fact, you could split twice more. You could be 4 small Black Puddings, all casting your, 17th level worth of Druid or Wizard spells. I don't know if I'd allow that as a DM, but nevertheless, they put it in a stat block and then they gave us a spell that allowed us to access it. And yeah, if you need to access spells, I just put here the Coatl, mainly because I wanted to point out that you can access Greater Restoration many, many times. So if somebody is really exhausted, you can turn into, 5 different creatures and remove 5 different levels of exhaustion from them with 5 Greater Restoration spells and no material component. Now, because you can't turn into an undead creature, it does remove a lot of the incorporeal options, but not all of them. So here's an example of the Shadow Demon that has incorporeal movement that allows you to move through solid objects. So if you're going somewhere and you need to get through a wall or a floor or a ceiling, you can turn into a Shadow Demon as a magic action, go through it, and then turn back. Oh, and if you ever cast Shape Change and you don't have full hit points when you cast it, Then just turn into a regenerating creature. I've brought up the classic example of the troll here, but there's lots of regenerating creatures. And you keep your initial hit points. So you'll get your regeneration, in the case of the troll, 15 points at the start of each of its turns until you're at full hit points, and then turn into something else. I just brought up the Githzerai Zerth here because of plane shift, though there are almost countless creatures that can cast plane shift, and they can do so without a material component. And normally plane shift requires a fork attuned to the plane you want to shift to. If you don't need that material component, you can plane shift anywhere you want. And you can take your entire party with you, and you turn into something else, and you can plane shift anywhere else. So plane shift becomes super cheap. Just brought up the Hydra because, again, you can do cool stuff because these stat blocks weren't created assuming that players were going to be able to access them, even though they must have known that players would be able to access them. But nevertheless, it allows you to do broken stuff like a Hydra. You can turn into a Hydra, and then you can abuse the multiple heads thing by having people heal you in between you taking damage, and you can basically get infinite heads with the Hydra, and then go into combat and make, 500 attacks. And yes, we can access all kinds. If there is a spell that is an action to cast and doesn't use concentration, it's probably somewhere available to you with Shapechange. So here's Mass Suggestion. This is a great spell, one of the best spells in the game. It's a one action cast, no concentration. Or you want a higher level spell, Noble Prodigy has Befuddlement. That's an 8th level spell. Speaking of 8th level spells, there's the Arcanoloth. You might as well turn into an Arcanoloth somewhere during your Shapechange outside of combat and cast Mind Blank. Mind Blank is an 8th level spell, doesn't require concentration, has a long duration, makes you immune to all psychic damage. It gives you other benefits as well. You're immune to the charm condition, you can't be scryed upon, but you might as well just turn into Arcanoloth at some point and cast Mind Blank on yourself and then turn into something else. And it doesn't have to be on you. You can cast Mind Blank on something else. Bringing up the Archmage here because it also has Mind Blank. So even if you can't turn into an Arcanoloth more than once, you can still cast multiple Mind Blanks. You just find the creatures that have it. But let's say you're going to go into a fight against a super powerful spellcaster. Well, maybe you want to be a Rakshasa. They get greater magic resistance. Automatically succeed on all saving throws against spells and other magical effects. And the attack rolls of spells automatically miss it. Don't like your current battle map? Well, the Purple Worm has a 50-foot burrow speed and leaves a 10-foot permanent tunnel behind it. So you can just go where you want to go whenever you want to go there. And the entire party can go too. Now we're getting into the higher challenge rating stuff. We're up to challenge rating 16. You should still be able to become a Planetar regardless of your level because you should be 17th level or higher when you cast a spell. This is just a really good combat form. Planetar is something I might take if I am at range or I want good ranged attacks because of Holy Burst. Multi-attack, the Planetar makes 3 Radiant Sword attacks or uses Holy Burst twice. So you can use Holy Burst twice. You get each enemy in a 20-foot radius sphere centered on a point on the Planetar can see within 120 feet. So it's got great range, got area of effect, 76 radiant damage, which is less than a fireball, but you are casting 2 of them. So you get basically 14 d6 worth of radiant damage at 120-foot range. That's pretty good. And the true sight 120 feet isn't too bad either. There's a couple challenge rating 17 dragons I think are pretty good. The Adult Gold Dragon is one of them. So if you're 17th level, you can take this form. We're going to have Blind Sight of 60 feet. We're going to have 3 legendary resistances. By the way, you can just turn into another creature with legendary resistances, so you should really never run out of legendary resistances. So you don't really need to be a Rakshasa, I guess, because you can just make as many saves as you need to make. And what do we got here? We got a Great Fire Breath. We got a multi-attack. Probably wouldn't use that, but the Fire Breath I would. They have the Weakening Breath, which is decent. Technically speaking, they have the ability to cast Shapechange without concentration. I don't think that's a rabbit hole I would jump down. The main thing I wanted to talk about here is the legendary actions. We got some really nice legendary actions here. The one that really stands out to me is Banish. So Banishment is a spell that would require concentration, so we wouldn't be able to use it. But here, as a legendary action, so this isn't even our turn. We did our Fire Breath on our turn. So we take Banish as a legendary action. Creature makes a Charisma saving throw, DC 21. And that creature is anyone we can see within 120 feet. And we do have Blind Sight if we need it. And if they fail, they take 3d6 force damage. They have the incapacitated condition, and they're transported to a harmless demiplane until the start of our next turn, at which point it reappears in an unoccupied space of our choice within 120 feet of us. And no concentration. It's not even the spell. Can't even be counterspelled. The adult red dragon, same challenge rating, does even more damage with its fire breath. By the way, these are 60-foot cones, so they're pretty darn big. And with its legendary actions, it can cast Command at 2nd level, and then it can use Fiery Rays, which allows it to cast Scorching Ray another 2 times. So we got 6 Scorching Ray attacks and a 2nd level command. Now let's say we want a whole bunch of range, or we're maybe surrounded by enemies, an army of enemies. Well, then we might want to become a Sphinx of Valor. This is also challenge rating 17, and we can use our action to roar, and we can roar 3 times, so over 3 rounds. This has a 500-foot emanation, and all our enemies, they make a save, or they're frightened, then they make a save, or they're paralyzed, and then they make a save, or they take damage. So those challenge rating 17 forms should last you up to level 20. But once we get to level 20, we have another couple interesting options. We can now become an Ancient Dragon. So the Ancient Brass Dragon is here. Gargantuan Dragon. So, you could fly around the entire party. They could just get on your back. We have the Blind Sight, 60 feet. We now have 4 legendary resistances. Our Fire Breath is a 90-foot long line. But we also have this Sleep Breath. Check this out. This is not a recharge ability. So that means we can do it on our turn, every turn. Constitution saving throw, DC 21, 90-foot cone, so it's absolutely massive. And creatures that fail are incapacitated. That's great. And if they fail again, they're unconscious. And there's no recharge. This is really, really powerful. And then we have the Animal Lord, also challenge rating 20. This might be useful if you're looking for a smaller creature to turn into, as it is medium-sized. Fly 60 feet with hover. Hover's always nice to have. True sight 120 feet. This has all the stuff you'd expect from a high challenge rating creature. It's got legendary resistances, 4 of them. It's got legendary actions. In fact, if you just want to do fighting stuff, you can just, on your turn, you do the Radiant Rays as part of your multi-attack, and then on your legendary actions, you do Radiant Strikes, which allow you to do Radiant Ray again as legendary actions. So we're getting 2 Radiant Rays on our turn, and then 3 off turn. That's 5, 46 plus 6 attacks every round. But another action you might want to take is this Animal Spirit. This also has no recharge. Now you're going to choose which kind of Animal Lord you want to be, but let's say we choose the Sage option. So we conjure an Animal Spirit that strikes a creature and then disappears. They make a Dexterity saving throw, DC 20, and if they fail, they take 40-10 plus 6 radiant damage. If they succeed on the save, they take half damage, but whether they succeed or fail, they will have disadvantage on all their attack rolls and all their ability checks until the end of their next turn. So if we have one big bad enemy, we can give it disadvantage on all of its attacks and all of its ability checks. It doesn't get a saving throw, and we can just do it for the entire combat. So when it comes to Shapechange, I think it is the most powerful spell in the game if you have an unlimited memory and recall. But you don't. Nobody does. And I certainly don't either. I gave a whole bunch of examples of cool stuff you could do in this video that I won't be able to recall the next time I cast Shapechange. And I'll think about after the game, I should have Shapechanged into this thing and I could have done that thing. That's the way it works with this spell. So in a practical sense, it doesn't have the power of its potential. It's still really, really powerful. I think it's pretty clearly more powerful than Wish. But is it more powerful than Prismatic Wall or True Polymorph that also have some really crazy stuff? I'm not sure yet. We're going to do one more video in this series. I'm going to go over the Wish spell itself. We're going to look at all 4 spells, and I'll rank them for you. So that'll be the final video in this series, and then you'll know at least what I think the most powerful spell in D&D is, and you can make your own informed decision what spell you think is the most powerful in D&D. So I hope you'll join me for that. Join me on Friday as my Druid subclass series continues. Otherwise, until then, I'm going to sit back, relax, and have some fun. D&D is for everyone. Thanks, everybody. Talk to you soon.